Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're exploring the work of Dr. Khaled Waleed. He's a scholar with a unique perspective on religious history, specifically the locations of some of the world's most important religious sites.
Yeah, Dr. Waleed's work is fascinating. What I find most interesting about his approach is that he doesn't just rely on one area. He combines a deep understanding of the Quran with linguistic analysis and historical research to build these really detailed arguments.
Okay, so let's break down some of those arguments. One of the biggest things that jumps out is his claim that the traditional location of Mecca and all the stories that we've come to associate with it may not be completely accurate. He's even challenging the idea that prophets, like Abraham, ever traveled outside of the Holy Land.
Right, and one of the key pieces of evidence that Dr. Waleed uses to support this is a verse from the Quran. It's Surah Yusuf 109. And it states, "What we have sent before you is nothing but men to whom we have revealed from among the people of the villages." So, have they not traveled through the earth and observed? How was the end of those before them? And the home of the hereafter is best for those who fear Allah, so will you not reason? So Dr. Waleed argues that this verse suggests that prophets were actually connected to a specific region, the Holy Land, and they didn't travel as extensively as, traditionally believed.
Okay, so if not Mecca, where does Dr. Waleed believe these significant religious events took place?
Well, he pinpoints Jerusalem. Specifically, a location he refers to as Baca, as the true center. He actually connects, through his research, Baca with the biblical Baca, and he argues that this linguistic link points to Jerusalem as the true Mecca, the site of, all these crucial religious events.
Hold on, Baca is mentioned in the Bible. That's a pretty strong connection, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And Dr. Waleed takes it a step further. He describes Jerusalem as, he calls it a ship of salvation and the true mother city. And I think this metaphor is really powerful. What do you think? What do you think he's trying to convey with those terms?
When I hear that, it sounds like he's emphasizing the importance of Jerusalem. And not just as a physical location, but as like a central point for humanity, a source of spiritual guidance and refuge.
Absolutely. And this idea that Jerusalem is this true center, it's not just Dr. Waleed's idea, Other researchers like Dan Gibson, Patricia Crown, and Tom Holland, they've also presented strong arguments for Petra being the original Mecca.
So even if their research might focus on Petra, it's still supporting Dr. Waleed's broader idea about the importance of Jerusalem.
Exactly. Their findings add another layer to this idea that all prophets, and therefore the origins of all the major religions, are connected to the Holy Land, specifically Jerusalem.
Okay, well, this is where it starts to get even more interesting. Dr. Waleed suggests that the story of Noah's flood and where Mount Ararat is might need to be looked at again. He actually believes that Mount Ararat is the Mount of Olives, which he calls Arafat, and it's located in, you guessed it, Jerusalem.
Yeah, so we have that linguistic connection he's made between Baca and the biblical Baca, and now Arafat being potentially the biblical Mount Ararat. These geographical connections that he's drawing are very extensive. It really challenges the traditional narrative.
It really does. It makes you wonder, if we're wrong about these locations, what else might we have gotten wrong about these stories?
That's a great question. And it's something that Dr. Waleed explores even further. For instance, he challenges the idea that Abraham had 2 wives. He says that the Quran only mentions one. He really analyzes the source material carefully and questions a lot of the things that people have just accepted for centuries without, really thinking about it.
And that's just the beginning. Dr. Waleed goes deep into linguistic analysis, like looking at what men and women mean in the Quran. And then, things get maybe even more fascinating and perhaps controversial when he starts to connect figures like the Maccabees and the Hasmoneans to, groups mentioned in Islamic history.
Yeah, this is a really deep dive, and we've only started to scratch the surface. So when we come back, we'll look at Dr. Waleed's analysis of men and women in the Quran, and then we'll get into those connections he's making to these historical figures, which are sure to spark some, interesting conversations, to say the least. Welcome back. So let's dive a bit deeper into some of the linguistic discoveries that Dr. Waleed has made, particularly his analysis of the terms men and women in the Quran.
Yeah, when I first heard about this, I have to admit I was a little confused. Like, is he talking about literal genders here?
Yeah.
But it turns out to be much more nuanced than that, right?
Right, exactly. Dr. Waleed argues that these terms, they actually represent different approaches to knowledge and faith. He suggests that men, as they're used in the Quran, symbolize those who are actively seeking knowledge, who engage with the divine through understanding and critical thinking. So they question, they analyze, they really strive to, grasp the depth of God's message.
So it's like they're the scholars of faith, always seeking to learn and apply that knowledge.
Exactly. And on the other hand, women symbolize those who accept knowledge more passively, without that same, that same level of critical examination. And it's not a negative judgment on women at all. It's more of a symbolic representation of two contrasting approaches to faith, two different ways of approaching knowledge.
That makes sense, like two sides of the same coin. And this ties into his idea of how prophets were chosen, right? It's not about being pre-selected, but about actually earning that role through their own knowledge and understanding.
Precisely. He argues that the prophets, they weren't destined for greatness, from birth, but they achieved it through their dedication to understanding and applying God's message. They embodied the qualities of the men in that, in that symbolic sense.
Yeah.
Reaching a higher level of understanding through that commitment to knowledge.
It's a very different way of looking at it, isn't it? I mean, it really challenges that traditional view of prophets as being divinely appointed from birth.
It does. And it brings up some really interesting questions, about the role of humans in the divine plan. It suggests that we have this responsibility to actually seek out knowledge, to understand, to engage with our faith, not just to, passively accept things.
Okay, so if the traditional narrative about Mecca isn't accurate, and all prophets were centered around Jerusalem, where does that leave the story of the Prophet Muhammad?
Well, this is where some of Dr. Waleed's most controversial claims come in. He claims that the Prophet Muhammad wasn't actually from Mecca, as traditionally believed. He was actually of Palestinian origin.
And he points to the fact that there isn't a lot of solid historical evidence for Mecca existing before the Abbasid period, right?
Exactly. And he goes even further, suggesting that many of the stories about Muhammad's life in Mecca, they were potentially fabricated much later, like during that Abbasid period to, support their power and legitimize their rule.
Wow. So he's suggesting that a huge part of Islamic history as we know it might be a constructed narrative, like it was designed to serve a specific purpose, a political purpose.
That's exactly what he's arguing. And it's sparked a lot of debate, a lot of controversy in academic circles and, beyond.
Let's dig into some of the specific narratives that Dr. Waleed is challenging. For example, he questions how authentic the Kaaba in Mecca really is. He claims that the structure that we see today might not be the original.
Right. He points out that there aren't many detailed descriptions of the Kaaba from the time of the Prophet Muhammad. The earliest really detailed accounts that we have, they come from centuries later, after the Abbasid period.
He also has doubts about the Zamzam well as a sacred source of water. He cites scientific reports that have actually shown it to be contaminated.
Yeah, Dr. Waleed suggests that the story of the Zamzam, kind of like the narrative about the Kaaba, might have been, maybe embellished or even fabricated, to create a sense of sacredness around Mecca, to kind of elevate its status.
And perhaps his most controversial claim is about the night journey, the Isra and Miraj, where the Prophet Muhammad is said to have ascended to heaven. Dr. Waleed says that this story was also fabricated later.
Yeah, and he points to similar stories that you find in other religions, stories about heavenly ascents. He's suggesting that the Islamic version might have been, borrowed and adapted, to kind of fit this narrative of Mecca's importance.
So according to Dr. Waleed, the very foundation of Islam, at least as many people understand it, rests on all these invented narratives and manipulated histories.
That's the core of his argument, yeah. He's calling for a reassessment of Islamic history. He wants people to go back to what he believes is the true message of the Quran, a message focused on, knowledge, reason, and the Holy Land.
And this is where things get really interesting, maybe even more controversial. Dr. Waleed connects the Meccans and the Hashemites, two major groups in Islamic history, with Jewish groups.
Yeah, he argues that the Meccans were actually the Maccabees. They were a Jewish group known for their, fierce defense of Jerusalem. And he links the Hashemites to the Hasmoneans, a dynasty of Jewish priest kings who ruled Judea before the Romans.
And what's his evidence for these connections?
linguistic analysis, he points to these like really striking similarities in their names and titles, similarities that he believes have been, well, kind of obscured over time. He suggests that maybe subtle changes in spelling and pronunciation, they've masked the true identities of these groups. And that's led to, this misrepresentation of their role in Islamic history.
It's sensitive stuff. He's basically saying that these key figures in Islamic history might not have been who they claim to be, and that their stories were, well, potentially manipulated.
It's definitely a complex argument, and it's important to keep in mind that it's based on his interpretation of the data, the historical and linguistic data, that is.
So if the traditional view of Mecca and the Prophet Muhammad's origins isn't right, what does that even mean for our understanding of the very beginnings of Islam?
That's really the central question that Dr. Waleed is wrestling with, and he wants his audience to think about it too. He proposes that Islam actually originated in the Holy Land, with Jerusalem at its center, and that, the Prophet Muhammad's teachings were just part of this long line of prophetic traditions coming from that region.
So the story about Islam, starting in Mecca, he sees that as a later invention. Like it was meant to shift power and religious authority away from Jerusalem.
Exactly. It's a bold claim, and it really requires us to re-examine a lot of our beliefs about Islamic history.
It's fascinating. Dr. Waleed isn't just presenting new facts. He's pushing for critical thinking, like questioning what we've been told and looking at alternative perspectives on history and faith.
Absolutely. He wants us to dig deeper, to look beyond just the surface level of these stories and really get into their historical and symbolic meaning.
And his analysis of men and women in the Quran is a great example of that, right?
Yeah.
It challenges us to approach our faith, whatever it is, with a more questioning mind.
And this leads us to his even more, let's say, controversial claims, like the idea that the Meccans and Hashemites were actually Jewish groups, the Maccabees and Hasmoneans. His linguistic evidence and his analysis of those historical texts is really thought-provoking, even if it challenges some deeply held beliefs.
And his conclusion that the Prophet Muhammad was actually of Palestinian origin, well, based on everything else, it makes sense.
Right.
The history of prophets being Jerusalem and the lack of evidence for Mecca before the Abbasids. It's definitely his most, let's say, bold claim. It throws a wrench into how we traditionally understand things.
Dr. Waleed's work as a whole really pushes us to rethink what we know about religious history and how faiths began. He's giving us a different perspective, a perspective that challenges us and encourages us to question what we think we know.
It's no wonder his work has caused so much debate, especially since these are such sensitive topics.
Yeah, of course. But whether you agree with his conclusions or not, you can't deny that his research is super engaging and thought-provoking. He makes us want to learn more, to dig deeper into those historical and linguistic details of these traditions.
It's been a fascinating, and I'd say pretty intense exploration of his ideas.
It really has. And, from questioning the traditional location of Mecca to exploring those linguistic depths of the Quran, and even that idea of prophets earning their roles, not just being chosen, there's a lot to unpack.
What I find most striking is just how bold Dr. Waleed's claims are. He's not just tweaking the narrative a little, right? He's proposing a complete rethinking of how we understand religious history.
Absolutely. His argument that Jerusalem, that Baca, is the true center, and that all those prophets were connected to that location, it's a huge challenge to what we've always been told.
And his take on Noah's flood and the location of Mount Ararat, to think it might not be in Turkey, like we've always learned, but the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. That Arafat he keeps talking about, it adds a whole other layer of intrigue.
It really does. And those connections he draws, like Baca and the biblical Baca, plus all the historical research and scriptural analysis, well, it gives his claims a lot of weight, doesn't it?
Even his smaller points, like how he rejects the story of Abraham having 2 wives, based on the Quran only mentioning 1. It makes you wonder what other stories we've just taken for granted without really questioning them.
I think that's exactly what Dr. Waleed is trying to get us to do. And that leads us to his more, let's say, controversial claims. The idea that the Meccans and Hashemites were actually Jewish groups, the Maccabees and Hasmoneans. His evidence, the linguistics and historical analysis, it's thought-provoking, even if it goes against some strongly held beliefs.
And his conclusion about the Prophet Muhammad being of Palestinian origin. Based on everything else, it kind of fits, doesn't it? The history of prophets in Jerusalem, no evidence of Mecca before the Abbasids. It's a bold claim, that's for sure, and it really changes how we view things.
Dr. Waleed's research, when you take it all together, really encourages us to rethink how we understand religious history, how these faiths came to be. He's giving us a new perspective, challenging us to question everything.
It's clear why his work has sparked so much debate. It's fascinating, but touches on some very sensitive subjects.
Of course. But no matter what you think about his conclusions, you can't deny that his research is engaging. It makes you think. And it encourages us to dive deeper into the history and languages of these ancient traditions. Explosive.
Right.
He flat out rejects the traditional Islamic narrative of Prophet Muhammad's life in Mecca,
Wow.
arguing that there's no historical evidence to support it.
That's a direct challenge to one of the most fundamental narratives in Islamic history.
Right.
If the traditional story of Prophet Muhammad is questioned, then logically, the location of key Islamic holy sites would also be up for debate.
And that's precisely where he goes next.
Okay.
He argues that the true Islamic holy sites,
Right.
including the Kaaba,
Yeah.
are not in Mecca and Medina,
Okay.
but in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas.
Okay, now things are getting really interesting.
So how does he support this radical shift in location? Does he offer any specific evidence?
He does.
Okay.
He delves into both the Quran and historical analysis to make his case.
Okay.
He claims that Jerusalem is the Baca mentioned in the Quran, and that's where the true Kaaba is located.
That's a fascinating interpretation.
Yeah.
You know, for anyone who's not familiar with the term Baca,
Right.
it appears in the Quran in Surah Al-Imran, verse 96.
Okay.
And while it's traditionally associated with Mecca, there have been differing opinions on its exact meaning throughout history.
You're already adding those layers of context that I love.
Uh-huh.
And speaking of layers,
Okay.
look at it this way. The speaker then goes on to interpret Noah's Ark as a metaphor for Jerusalem itself.
A metaphor. Now, that's an unexpected twist.
Yeah.
So instead of a literal vessel, he's seeing the ark as a symbolic representation of something else entirely.
Exactly. He's basically saying that the Ark, as a place of refuge and spiritual salvation,
Right.
represents Jerusalem. He even ties this into the concept of the ship as a means of spiritual ascension,
Okay.
particularly for prophets upon their death.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
He's connecting the ark to the idea of a spiritual journey with Jerusalem as the ultimate destination. It's like he's reimagining the whole story within this new geographical and metaphorical framework.
Right.
Wow.
And it's all building towards his ultimate critique of traditional Islamic scholars and institutions.
Okay.
He accuses them of perpetuating falsehoods and misleading the faithful,
Right.
particularly when it comes to the location of holy sites and the narrative surrounding them.
Yeah.
He's really calling on people to think critically, to question what they've been told, and to engage directly with the Quran.
That's a bold move.
Yeah.
He's essentially saying, don't just blindly accept what you're told. Look for yourself, analyze the evidence, and come to your own conclusions.
Right.
That's a pretty powerful message, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. He's advocating for a much more independent and questioning approach to faith.
Yeah.
One that relies on personal exploration and interpretation rather than just following established authority.
It seems like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
His claims are certainly provocative, and I'm eager to see how he builds his case further.
Me too. And that's exactly what we'll be doing in the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Noah and the Ark of Baca, Jerusalem. As we delve further into this lecture, I think it's important to understand the historical context that he's challenging.
You're right. It's not like he's pulling these ideas out of thin air.
Right.
So where does he go next in his argument?
Well, he spends quite a bit of time building his case against Mecca's significance.
Okay.
He even goes so far as to say that there's no archaeological evidence
Really?
supporting the traditional narrative of Mecca's existence before a certain period
Right.
in Islamic history.
What period is he talking about?
He specifically mentions the Abbasid period.
Okay.
This dynasty ruled over a vast Islamic empire from the 8th to the 13th centuries, a time known for its intellectual and cultural flourishing.
So he's suggesting that Mecca, as we understand it in Islamic tradition,
Right.
didn't really become prominent until the Abbasid era.
Exactly.
That's a pretty significant claim.
It is. And he even questions the authenticity of certain graves in Medina that are
Okay.
traditionally attributed to prominent figures from early Islamic history.
Oh, wow.
He's basically saying, let's take a closer look at the historical record and see if these claims hold up.
He's not pulling any punches.
No, he's not.
So how does he connect this back to his argument about Jerusalem?
He's very methodical about building his case.
Okay.
He moves on to challenge the traditional belief that Prophet Muhammad lived in the desert.
Okay.
proposing instead that the prophet's life and activities were actually centered in Palestine,
Okay.
a region known for its fertile land and historical significance.
Okay, so he's shifting the entire geographical focus of early Islamic history.
Yes,
And that ties in with his claim about Jerusalem being the true Baca.
precisely. He portrays Jerusalem as the focal point of religious activity throughout history, a place where prophets consistently returned.
Right.
It's like he's redrawing the map of sacred spaces in Islamic tradition.
And then he brings back that fascinating metaphorical interpretation of Noah's Ark, right?
Exactly. He reminds us that he's not talking about a literal wooden vessel.
Right.
Instead, he sees the ark as a symbol of Jerusalem itself,
Okay.
offering spiritual refuge and a path to salvation.
It's like he's saying, forget what you've been told about the desert and camels. The real story is happening in Jerusalem.
That's a good way to put it. And he takes it even further by suggesting that the story of Noah's Ark and the concept of spiritual ascension are closely intertwined.
Okay.
He uses the term ship to describe this ascension, drawing a parallel between a ship carrying passengers to a new destination and the soul embarking on a spiritual journey upon death.
So in his view, the Ark, Jerusalem, and the concept of spiritual ascension are all connected, with Jerusalem serving as the launching point for that journey.
Yes.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together in his argument.
You're getting it. And, this reinterpretation of history and sacred spaces leads him to some pretty strong criticisms of established religious authorities.
Yes, he doesn't hold back at all when it comes to critiquing those in positions of religious power.
Right. He accuses them of perpetuating falsehoods, particularly regarding the location of holy sites and the stories surrounding them.
Okay.
He even calls them devils and liars at one point.
Wow.
You can really hear the passion in his voice.
It's like he feels this sense of urgency to expose what he believes to be the truth.
Right.
And he's not limiting his critique to just one religion either, right?
You're right. He calls out practices in both Christianity and Islam,
Okay.
specifically mentioning the selling of indulgences in Christianity and the practice of declaring others as infidels in Islam.
Wow, those are some pretty weighty topics.
They are.
Why does he focus on these specific practices?
He sees them as examples of how religion can be distorted for personal gain or to exert control over others.
Okay.
He believes they contradict the true spirit of faith and are driven by power and greed rather than genuine spiritual guidance.
It's a critique that has echoed throughout history, hasn't it?
Yes.
People challenging religious institutions and calling for reforms.
Right.
This speaker seems to be following in that tradition.
Absolutely. He's calling for a revolution in religious understanding, urging his listeners to question everything they've been taught and to engage directly with the Quran.
No.
He believes true understanding comes from personal engagement with sacred texts,
Right.
not from blindly following potentially corrupt authorities.
It's fascinating how he weaves together historical analysis, scriptural interpretation, and a critique of religious authority to build this alternative narrative.
It's a bold and thought-provoking approach, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
It challenges us to think critically about the sources of our beliefs and how those beliefs are shaped by both tradition and individual interpretation.
It's certainly given me a lot to think about. He's not just offering a different perspective.
Right.
He's presenting a whole new framework for understanding faith and history.
It is.
I'm curious to see where he goes from here.
Well, that's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive. We'll explore how he applies these reinterpretations to specific figures and events in religious history.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Noah and the Ark of Baca, Jerusalem.
Okay.
Things are about to get even more interesting as the speaker starts to apply his reinterpretations to some, well-known figures and stories.
I'm ready for it. Which stories does he focus on?
He dives right into the story of Abraham,
Okay.
but not in the way you might expect.
All right.
He challenges the traditional Islamic understanding of Abraham having multiple wives.
Okay.
He argues, based on his reading of the Quran,
Yeah.
that Abraham only had one wife, who was the mother of both Ishmael and Isaac.
That's a pretty significant departure from the traditional narrative.
Right.
What happens to the story of Hagar,
Right.
typically understood as Abraham's second wife and the mother of Ishmael?
He basically removes Hagar from the equation altogether.
Wow.
And he goes even further, rejecting the whole story of Abraham taking Hagar and Ishmael to the desert.
Okay.
He claims that Ishmael never left his father's side.
Wow. So he's not just tweaking the story.
Right.
He's fundamentally rewriting it.
Right.
What are the implications of this reinterpretation?
Well, By eliminating Hagar and Ishmael's journey to the desert,
Right.
he's directly challenging the traditional account of the founding of Mecca and the well of Zamzam.
Right. In the traditional narrative, it's Hagar and Ishmael who are associated with the discovery of the Zamzam, well, a site considered sacred in Islam.
Right.
So,
He's dismantling the very foundation upon which the significance of Mecca is built.
okay.
By removing this connection to Abraham, Ishmael, and Hagar,
Right.
he's further reinforcing his claim that Mecca isn't the true center of religious significance. That's exactly it. He even brings in what he claims is scientific analysis of the Zamzam well,
Okay.
suggesting that it's not like a miraculous source of water,
Right.
but simply a natural well formed in a volcanic rock formation.
He's really trying to debunk the myths and legends surrounding Mecca, using both religious texts and scientific evidence to support his claims.
And he applies the same approach to another historical narrative,
Okay.
the story of the Maccabees.
Ah, the Maccabees. Most people know them as a Jewish group who bravely defended Jerusalem against foreign invaders.
Right.
What's his take on them?
He flips the script completely.
Okay.
He claims that the Maccabees were actually a group of Israelites who distorted the true history of the region, claiming a connection to Jerusalem that didn't actually exist.
So he's essentially turning them from heroes into villains.
Yeah.
It seems like he's challenging any historical narrative that contradicts his claim of Jerusalem being the true center of religious significance.
That's a great observation. And he doesn't stop with ancient history. He connects these historical reinterpretations to the present,
Okay.
drawing a parallel between the Philistines, whom he views as the original defenders of Jerusalem,
Okay.
and the modern-day Palestinian resistance movement.
Ah, I see. He's bringing in the contemporary political dimension,
Right.
framing the struggle for Jerusalem not just as an ancient story, but as an ongoing conflict with deep roots in the past.
Exactly. And he uses a powerful metaphor to drive home his point,
Okay.
calling Jerusalem the ship of salvation.
Okay.
He's implying that those who align themselves with Jerusalem are on the right path, while those who follow other narratives, like those centered on Mecca, are destined to be lost at sea.
It's a striking image, isn't it? It ties back to his earlier interpretations of Noah's Ark and concept of spiritual ascension.
Right.
He's consistently using these metaphors of ships and journeys
Right.
to represent the search for truth and spiritual fulfillment with Jerusalem as the ultimate destination.
It all comes together so beautifully, even if you don't agree with his conclusions.
Yeah.
He's clearly passionate about his beliefs and presents a compelling argument.
He does.
It's definitely made me think twice about some things I thought I knew for sure.
This deep dive has been a real roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
We've explored reinterpretations of religious narratives, challenges to establish authority, and a complete reimagining of history itself.
Right.
It's been thought-provoking, to say the least.
So where does this leave us? We've unpacked this speaker's arguments,
Right.
analyzed his evidence, and considered the implications of his reinterpretations.
Yeah.
But the big question is, what do we as listeners do with this information?
That's the real challenge, isn't it? It's not about blindly accepting or rejecting any one interpretation.
Right.
It's about engaging with these ideas critically,
Right.
exploring different perspectives, and forming our own conclusions.
It reminds us that history and religious narratives are often open to interpretation.
They are.
There's always more to uncover, more to question, and more to learn.
This deep dive has hopefully sparked a sense of curiosity and encouraged you to embark on your own explorations.
Right.
Who knows what fascinating discoveries await?